I've been working on this story for years. It's about time someone in this family actually finished something. That's what my brother Elliot said. Easter Sunday, Maura's dining room, ham on the table, rolls in the basket, the good china out because company was visiting. He said it leaning back in his chair with both hands flat on the tablecloth, like he was about to deliver a keynote address. And the woman sitting across from him, the one my mother had introduced 40 minutes earlier as Natalie's co-worker's girlfriend, set down her fork very slowly and didn't move. I know, because I was watching her. I was watching Caroline Vance, my literary agent, listen to my younger brother describe the plot of my novel to a table full of people who had never once asked me what I was writing. I didn't say a word. I kept my hands in my lap. I finished my plate, but I need to go back. Because this didn't start at Easter. It started a long time before that. I've been a reference librarian at Boise Public Library for 5 years. I started when I was 25, fresh out of my master's program, and I loved the work from the first week. Quiet, organized, useful. I helped people find what they were looking for. I answered questions no one else had patience for. I shelved returns and pulled holds and managed the local history archive, and I was good at it. My family had a different opinion. Kenneth, my father, told me at Thanksgiving, the year I was hired, that I had traded a real career for a hobby with benefits. He said it while carving the turkey. No one at the table corrected him. Maura, my mother, smiled and said, "She'll figure it out eventually. Some people take longer." I was 25. I had a master's degree. I had a full-time position with the city, and my mother said I'd figure it out eventually. I swallowed it. I told myself that was simply what family did. Elliot was 21 that year. He was in his junior year at a private university my parents had paid full tuition for, $26,400 a year. He had changed his major 3 times by then: business, communications, English. He talked about startup ideas at dinner the way some people talk about the weather. Constantly, confidently, and without any evidence that he'd checked the forecast. Nobody told Elliot he was wasting his education. When Elliot graduated the following spring, he had $52,800 in student loan debt. He moved back to Boise. He said he was going to build something. What he built, as far as I could tell, was a collection of half-finished business plans and a very expensive coffee habit. 3 months after he moved home, my mother called me on a Tuesday evening. She didn't ask how I was. She said, "Natalie, your brother's loan payments are $1,100 a month. Your father and I already paid for his tuition. We can't cover this too. You're the one with the steady paycheck." I made $51,200 a year. I said yes. I set up the automatic transfer the following morning, $1,100 every month pulled from my checking account and sent directly to Elliot's loan servicer. He never thanked me, not once, not in 4 years, because that's how long I paid it. 48 months. $1,100 each time, totaling $52,800. I kept every receipt, every confirmation email, every monthly statement. I saved them in a folder on my desktop labeled E. Forrester, Loan. I don't know why I saved them then. I think some part of me already understood that no one was going to remember what I'd given if I didn't keep the proof myself. A year and a half after the loan payment started, my father called. Kenneth didn't call often. When he did, it was transactional. He said the homeowners association had placed a lien warning on the house. He was behind on fees, $600 a month. He described the potential lien the way you describe a leaky faucet. Annoying. Someone else's problem to fix. Just needed a hand for a little while. I said yes again. $600 a month for 30 months, totaling $18,000. Between the 2 payments, I was sending $1,700 every month to my family on a librarian's salary of $51,200 a year. That's roughly 40% of my take-home pay, depending on the month. I ate simply. I drove a 12-year-old sedan. I didn't take vacations. I didn't complain. And during all of it, every single month of it, I was writing. 3 years before that Easter dinner, I started a historical novel. It was set in 1890s Idaho, mining towns, women who built libraries in places that didn't want them. I wrote at night after my shifts. I wrote on weekends at the kitchen table of my 1-bedroom apartment. I kept a composition notebook, dated, handwritten, where I outlined every chapter, every character arc, every revision note. And I saved every digital draft to my cloud storage account with automatic timestamps. I didn't tell my family I was writing a novel. I had learned by then what happened when I told my family things. My father had once picked up that composition notebook during a visit, flipped through 3 pages, set it down, and said, "A diary for people who can't commit to anything real." I put the notebook in my desk drawer after that. I kept writing. 8 months before Easter, I queried a literary agency in New York. I sent 20 pages and a synopsis to an agent named Caroline Vance. She requested the full manuscript within 4 days. 6 weeks later, she called me at work during my lunch break and told me she wanted to represent me. 2 months after that, she sold the novel and a second book to a major New York publisher for $175,000. $175,000 split into 2 payments, $87,500 on signing, $87,500 on delivery of the second manuscript. The first check was deposited into my account 6 months before Easter. I told no one, not Kenneth, not Maura, not Elliot. I continued making the $1,100 loan payment. I continued making the $600 HOA payment. I continued going to work at the library every morning at 8. I continued eating simply and driving my 12-year-old sedan. I kept the deal secret because I knew, with the kind of certainty that only comes from 30 years of being someone's afterthought, that if my family found out, they would find a way to make it about themselves, or they would find a way to diminish it, or both. If you've ever poured everything into something and watched someone in your family take the credit, hit that like button and subscribe. This story is for you. I was right, but not in the way I expected. At some point in the 2 months before Easter, my mother visited my apartment. She said she was helping with my Wi-Fi setup. She was in my office for 11 minutes while I made tea in the kitchen. During those 11 minutes, Maura memorized the password to my cloud storage account. I know this because of what happened next. She gave the password to Elliot. Elliot logged into my cloud storage. He downloaded my full manuscript, 94,000 words, 3 years of revision history, every chapter I had written in silence while sending his loan payments on time, and he submitted it to 3 literary agencies under his own name. 3 agencies, his name on the cover page, his email address in the query letter, my words, my years, my work. I didn't know any of this on Easter morning. I woke up early, I made coffee, I drove to my parents' house because Maura had asked me to bring a guest. I had mentioned, casually, weeks earlier, that a friend from a work connection might be in town. I hadn't said the friend was my literary agent. I hadn't said anything about publishing. Maura had filled in her own story, Natalie's co-worker's girlfriend. She introduced Caroline that way at the front door, and Caroline, who is not a woman who corrects strangers unnecessarily, simply smiled and said, "Hello." We sat down to dinner. 14 people around the extended table, ham, scalloped potatoes, green beans with almonds, Maura's lemon cake on the sideboard, the good china, cloth napkins, Easter lilies in a glass vase at the center. Elliot was seated at the far end, next to Kenneth. He waited until the plates were served. He waited until the conversation had settled into that comfortable hum of forks and small talk. Then he cleared his throat. "So I have some news," he said. The table went quiet. Maura set down her water glass. Kenneth looked up from his plate, one of the only times I'd seen him look directly at either of us during a family meal. "I've been working on something," Elliot said. "A novel, historical fiction, set in Idaho, 1890s, mining towns, the early settlement period, women building institutions out of nothing." He paused. He smiled. "I've submitted to a few agencies. I'm already getting interest." Maura pressed both hands to her chest. "Elliot," she said, "a novel?" "It's been a long time coming," he said. "I've been working on this story for years." He looked around the table, and then he said the rest of it, the part that landed like a hand across my face. "It's about time someone in this family actually finished something." Kenneth nodded slowly, not smiling exactly, but something close to it, something I had never seen directed at me. Approval. Maura was beaming. She reached across the table and squeezed Elliot's wrist. "I always said you had it in you," she said. "Didn't I say that, Kenneth?" "You did," Kenneth said. And then Elliot started describing the plot. He described the protagonist, a woman named Clara who arrives in a silver mining town in 1893 with a crate of donated books and a land grant for a public reading room. He described the central conflict, the mining company's campaign to block public assembly spaces. He described the chapter structure. He described the ending. He described my book. Every detail, every turn. 3 years of my life recited across the Easter table between bites of scalloped potatoes. I sat perfectly still. My hands were in my lap. My fork was on my plate. I didn't look at Elliot. I looked at Caroline. Caroline Vance, seated 4 chairs to my left, the woman Maura had introduced as a co-worker's girlfriend, had gone completely still. Her napkin was in her hand, frozen halfway to the table. Her eyes were locked on Elliot. Not with shock exactly, with the very specific stillness of a person who is hearing something she recognizes, because she did recognize it. She had read every word of it. She had sold every word of it. She had negotiated a $75,000 contract for every word of it. And my brother was sitting at the Easter table telling 14 people that he had written it. The table erupted, aunts asking what the book was called, cousins asking when it would be published, Maura already planning a launch party, Kenneth pouring Elliot a second glass of wine. No one looked at me. No one asked me a single question. I was exactly what I had always been at that table. Present, paying, and invisible. Caroline excused herself. She said she needed to use the restroom. She picked up her phone from beside her plate and walked down the hall without hurrying. I stayed in my seat. I finished my green beans. I listened to my mother describe how she had always known Elliot had the creative gene, and I waited. My phone vibrated once in my pocket. I didn't reach for it immediately. I waited until Maura stood to clear the salad plates, until the conversation shifted to someone's cousin's new deck renovation, until no one was looking at me. Then I slid the phone out under the table and tilted the screen toward my lap. One message from Caroline Vance. Your brother just pitched me your book. I recorded his description on my phone. I read it twice. I set the phone face down on my thigh. I picked up my water glass and took a slow drink. Then I set the glass back on the table, aligned my fork on my plate, and folded my napkin beside it. I didn't feel what I expected to feel. I had imagined, in some distant and abstract way, that a moment like this would arrive with heat, with a pulse in my temples, with the sick flush of betrayal rising through my chest. But that's not what happened. What happened was colder than that, quieter, like a dial being turned down until the room went silent, even though everyone was still talking. I finished my plate. I complimented Maura's lemon cake when she served it. I accepted a cup of coffee. I listened to Elliot describe his plans for the series potential of a book he had not written, and I didn't flinch, and I didn't blink, and I didn't leave early. Caroline returned from the hallway 7 minutes later. She sat down, picked up her fork, and said something polite about the potatoes. She didn't look at me. She didn't need to. We both understood what had just happened. We both understood what was coming. I drove home at 4:15 that afternoon. The sun was still up. The road was dry. I parked in my assigned spot outside my apartment building, turned off the engine, and sat in the car for 6 minutes without moving. Then I went inside. I made a cup of tea. I sat on the couch, and I let it settle. I didn't call Elliot. I didn't call my parents. I didn't send a text. I didn't compose a furious email or draft a confrontation speech or rehearse what I would say when the time came. There was nothing to rehearse. There was nothing to say to any of them. Something inside me shifted that night. Not loud, not dramatic, just a clean, quiet break, like the spine of a book cracking open for the first time. I had spent 4 years paying Elliot's loans, 2.5 years covering Kenneth's HOA, 30 years, absorbing the particular silence of a family that looked through me when I spoke and asked me to write checks when I was done. I had kept the deal secret because I knew they would diminish it. What I hadn't anticipated was that they would steal it. But sitting in my apartment that Easter night, I understood something I hadn't let myself name before. This wasn't carelessness. Maura hadn't stumbled across my password. She had memorized it during a visit she'd planned. She had given it to Elliot. Elliot had downloaded 94,000 words of my work and submitted it to 3 agencies with his name on the cover page. Kenneth would back whatever story preserved Elliot's reputation. This was coordinated. This was deliberate. And for the first time in years, I felt ready to face the truth I'd been avoiding. I went to bed. I slept through the night. I went to work on Monday morning at 8. I shelved returns. I answered reference questions. I pulled holds. I ate lunch at my desk. I drove home. On Tuesday night, I sat down at my kitchen table at 10:40 p.m. The apartment was quiet. The streetlight cut through the blinds in thin lines across the counter. I opened my laptop. The screen lit the room in pale blue. I opened the cloud storage folder I had maintained for 3 years. I scrolled to the bottom. The first time-stamped entry was a partial chapter outline. Chapter 1, The Crate and the Grant, dated 37 months earlier. I scrolled slowly through the history. Hundreds of entries. Draft 1, Draft 2, Draft 7. Revision notes, character sheets. Research files on silver mining operations in the Boise Basin, 1890 to 1899. Every file time-stamped, every save automatic. 3 years of my life documented down to the minute. I opened my email. I created a new message. In the recipient line, I typed the address for my publisher's legal department, an address Caroline had given me 6 months earlier during the contract process, just in case you ever need it. I typed one sentence in the body. Please find attached documentation of original authorship and evidence of unauthorized reproduction and submission of my contracted manuscript. Then I attached 4 files. The first was Caroline Vance's audio recording from the Easter dinner. Eliot's voice clear and confident, describing every plot point of a novel he had not written to a table that included the agent who had sold it. The second was an exported archive of my cloud storage draft history, 3 years of timestamps, hundreds of files. A chain of creation that began 37 months before Eliot ever opened my account. The third was a set of photographs. Every page of my dated composition notebook. Handwritten chapter outlines. Character notes. Revision marks in 3 colors of ink. The first entry dated to the same month as the first digital file. The fourth was a documentation log of Eliot's 3 fraudulent agency submissions, including the query letters sent under his name, the agency response records, and the dates of submission, all within 6 weeks of Easter. I read the email once. I read it again. I pressed send. The soft click of confirmation was the only sound in the apartment. I closed the laptop. I went to bed. I slept through the night. I closed the laptop. Before I went to bed, I opened my banking app. I navigated to the recurring transfer screen. 2 entries, E. Forrester, student loan, $1,100 per month. K. Forrester, HOA, $600 per month. Combined, $1,700 monthly. I had been sending that amount for years. I selected the first transfer and tapped cancel. I selected the second and tapped cancel. 2 clicks. The status on both changed to inactive. I didn't send a message. I didn't make a call. I closed the app and went to bed. The publisher's legal department moved within 72 hours. Caroline Vance submitted a formal written affidavit identifying every plot point Eliot had described at Easter as matching the manuscript she had acquired 8 months earlier. The audio recording was time-stamped and authenticated. My 3-year draft history was submitted as the primary evidence of original authorship. Eliot's fraudulent agency submissions were flagged and formally withdrawn. All 3 agencies issued retractions with fraud notations permanently attached to his file. The copyright infringement claim was filed under 17 U.S.C. Section 501, federal protection attached to my work from the moment of creation, not publication. Eliot's submission of my manuscript under his name was not a gray area. It was not a family misunderstanding. It was theft, documented and time-stamped. And then my family did what my family does. They circled. Eliot called first. I let it go to voicemail. He called again. I declined without hesitation. He called a third time. I turned off the ringer. Maura called 20 minutes later. I let it ring. She left a voicemail I didn't listen to. She sent a text that read, "Natalie Ann, you need to call me right now. This has gone too far." I didn't respond. Then Maura did something I hadn't expected, though I should have. She composed an email, not to me but to my publisher, claiming that the novel contained stolen family stories, and that its publication would constitute an invasion of the Forrester family's privacy. She sent it from her personal email address. She signed it with her full name. That email was forwarded directly to the legal department already handling the copyright claim. It did not help Eliot's case. It became Exhibit D in the publisher's file. Documented evidence of tortious interference with an existing contractual relationship. It would eventually add $12,400 in supplemental damages to the judgment. Kenneth's contribution came 10 days later. He signed a written statement, submitted to the publisher's legal team, asserting that the novel's plot originated in shared family conversations, and that Eliot had as much claim to the material as anyone. It was a material false statement made in a formal legal proceeding. The publisher's attorneys referred it as grounds for a perjury complaint. Kenneth was not charged, but the referral entered the formal record, and it was referenced in the public court filing. Maura launched her campaign among the extended family. 31 text messages, 2 group chat posts, 1 mass email. The subject line read, "What Natalie is doing to her own brother." The content described me as jealous, delusional, and vindictive. She claimed I had always resented Eliot's potential. None of it mattered. The timestamps mattered. The audio recording mattered. The 3 years of documented drafts mattered. The dated composition notebook mattered. Caroline Vance's affidavit mattered. 5 weeks after the filing, the full financial scope of the case became clear. Primary copyright infringement damages, $41,500. Supplemental damages from Maura's tortious interference, $12,400. Total legal exposure for the Forrester family, $53,900. Elliot had none of it. He had never had it. He had spent 4 years after college building nothing, funded by my $1,100 monthly transfers, and he did not have $41,500. Kenneth and Maura had it. Barely. They liquidated $41,500 from their retirement savings to prevent a default judgment. The number matched exactly. Their retirement account drained by the precise amount their son owed for stealing their daughter's work. The remaining $12,400 in supplemental damages, Maura's contribution to the case, generated entirely by her own email, was structured as a separate payment schedule. And then Elliot came to my door, a Friday evening, 8 days after the copyright filing. The doorbell rang at 6:47. I looked through the peephole. Elliot stood in the hallway, shirt untucked, eyes swollen and red-rimmed. He hadn't shaved in days. I opened the door, halfway. I kept my hand on the frame. "Natalie," he said. His voice cracked on the second syllable. "You need to call the publisher. Tell them it was a misunderstanding. Tell them we worked on it together. Tell them something. Anything." I stayed quiet, letting him continue. "You don't understand what you just did," he said. "You killed my career. You filed legal claims against your own brother. Do you hear yourself? Do you hear what you sound like right now?" I looked at him. I kept my voice steady. "I hear you, Elliot." He waited for more, for an explanation, for a justification, for the kind of long, desperate reasoning I had always offered when I wanted to be understood by people who had no interest in understanding me. I didn't give him any of it. "Elliot," I said, "where's your apology?" His mouth opened. Nothing came out for 3 seconds. Then, "The situation is complicated, Natalie. You know that. You know how family works." "I know," I said. I stepped back. I closed the door. Not a slam. Just the quiet click of the lock sliding into place. His footsteps didn't move for a long time, then they did. Down the hall, down the stairs. Gone. I turned off the porch light. I walked to the kitchen. I sat down at the table in the quiet apartment and I felt nothing loud. Not anger, not grief, not satisfaction. Just a clean, sharp clarity, like the first real silence I'd had in years. I blocked every phone number that belonged to them. I went through my contacts on Wednesday morning before work, the day after I'd sent the email and canceled the transfers. Elliot, Maura, Kenneth. I removed them from my phone. I deleted the family group chat. I archived every email thread without reading the new ones. There were 14 unread messages from Maura alone, all with subject lines that started with Natalie Ann and ended with exclamation points. I didn't open a single one. I removed Maura from my cloud storage account and changed the password. I removed Kenneth from my emergency contact list at work and replaced him with Helen Brooks. I canceled the recurring calendar reminder I'd kept for 4 years. E. Forrester, loan payment, 1st of month, and the one I'd kept for 30 months. K. Forrester, HOA, 15th of month. 2 reminders, 2 deletions. The calendar looked emptier than it had in years. I didn't do any of it in anger. I did it in clarity. The quiet that followed was different from anything I had experienced in my adult life. For the first 4 days, I kept expecting the phone to ring. Not because it could, but because the habit of anticipation had been trained into me over 3 decades. I'd spent so long bracing for Maura's calls, for Kenneth's transactional requests, for Elliot's silence that somehow still demanded something from me, that the absence of all of it felt like a sound I couldn't quite identify, like a room where the refrigerator has finally stopped humming and you realize you'd been hearing it for years without knowing. By the second week, I stopped reaching for the phone at dinner. By the 3rd week, I slept through the night without waking at 2 a.m. to check for messages. By the 4th week, I sat at my kitchen table on a Saturday morning with coffee that was still hot, not cold from hours of distraction, and I read a book for pleasure for the first time in months. The apartment was quiet. It had always been quiet, but now the quiet wasn't heavy anymore. It was sharp. It was clear. I went to work. I shelved returns. I answered reference questions. I ate lunch at my desk. I came home. I opened the composition notebook and began outlining the second book. The settlement took 4.5 months to finalize. I learned the details through the publisher's legal department, not through any contact with my family. The process was straightforward. Elliot's fraudulent submissions to the 3 agencies were formally withdrawn. Each agency issued a retraction with a fraud notation permanently attached to his file. Those notations would follow him. Any future query letter bearing his name would be cross-referenced against the fraud record. He would not submit to a traditional literary agency again. The primary copyright infringement judgment came in at $41,500. Elliot did not have $41,500. He did not have a fraction of it. He had not held steady employment since graduating 4 years earlier. His bank account, as referenced in the legal filings, showed a balance that wouldn't have covered 2 months of the loan payments I'd been making on his behalf. Kenneth and Maura liquidated $41,500 from their retirement savings to prevent a default judgment. The same retirement account Maura had referenced at every holiday as our security, drained to cover what their son owed. The supplemental damages from Maura's tortious interference email, $12,400, were structured as a separate payment schedule. Monthly installments. I didn't ask for the details. I didn't need them. The publisher's legal team handled everything. I signed what needed signing and returned to my work. Kenneth's false statement, the one he had signed asserting that the novel's plot originated in shared family conversations, was referred to the publisher's attorneys as grounds for a perjury complaint. He was not charged. He was not arrested, but the referral entered the formal record. It was referenced in the public court filing. His name, attached to a documented false statement, became part of the permanent case file. The public filing was what broke the extended family campaign. Maura had sent 31 text messages, 2 group chat posts, and 1 mass email to every relative she could reach. The subject line of the email had been what Natalie is doing to her own brother. For 2 weeks it worked. Cousins I hadn't spoken to in years sent cautious messages asking if everything was okay. An aunt left a voicemail saying she was sure there were 2 sides. The narrative Maura had constructed, jealous sister, vindictive overreaction, family torn apart by pettiness, held for exactly as long as it took for the court filing to become public record. Then the relatives read it. They read about the 3 years of time-stamped drafts. They read about the audio recording. They read about Elliot's fraudulent agency submissions. They read about Maura's email to the publisher and Kenneth's false statement. They read about the $52,800 in student loan payments I had made on Elliot's behalf over 4 years and the $18,000 in HOA fees I had covered for Kenneth over 30 months, $70,800 in total, paid from a librarian's salary of $51,200 a year while I wrote a novel in silence that no one in my family knew existed. The calls to Kenneth and Maura stopped. The group chat went quiet. The cousins who had sent cautious messages didn't send follow-ups. The aunt who had left the voicemail about 2 sides never called again. By month 3, the silence around my parents' house was complete. I learned the rest through the channels that information travels when families fracture. A mention from a colleague who knew someone, a passing reference from Caroline, a detail in the legal correspondence that painted its own picture. Elliot moved back into Kenneth and Maura's house. He had no lease of his own to maintain. He'd been subletting a room from a college friend who asked him to leave after the court filing appeared in a background check. He returned to the house where he'd lived after graduation, to the bedroom he'd occupied while I sent $1,100 a month to cover the degree he'd used for nothing. He was 26 years old. He had no career. He had no agent. He had 3 fraud notations on file with 3 literary agencies. He had a public court record documenting copyright infringement. He applied for work at a warehouse distribution center in Nampa. Night shifts, $16.50 an hour. Kenneth and Maura's retirement account, the one that had held their gay security, was $41,500 lighter. The HOA payments I had been covering stopped the same Tuesday I sent the evidence email. The account simply showed no transfer that month or the next or the one after that. Kenneth received the first delinquency notice in June. He did not call me. He did not have my number anymore. Maura's payment schedule for the $12,400 in supplemental damages, the ones generated entirely by her own email to the publisher, stretched across monthly installments that I never asked about and never tracked. The money wasn't the point. It had never been the point. The email she had written to damage my contract had become evidence that damaged her household instead. The letter she received from the publisher's legal team, identifying her by name as the author of a documented act of tortious interference, was, according to Caroline, the first time Maura had ever seen her own behavior described in legal language by someone who was not obligated to forgive her. I didn't follow the details. I didn't seek updates. The information arrived the way weather arrives, gradually, ambient, and impossible to avoid entirely when you live in the same city. What I did instead was write. I worked on the second manuscript through the summer and into the fall. I wrote at the kitchen table, the same table where I had sent the email. I wrote in the composition notebook, a new one, green cover, dated on the first page. I wrote at the library during lunch breaks when the reference desk was quiet. I wrote the way I had always written, alone, in silence, with no one watching. 7 months after Easter, on a Tuesday morning in November, I arrived at work early. The sun was just clearing the foothills east of town. The library parking lot was nearly empty. I walked through the staff entrance, hung my coat in the break room, and started toward the reference desk. Helen Brooks was standing in the front lobby. She was 54 years old, had directed the library for 11 years, and was not a woman given to ceremony, but she was standing in the lobby at 7:48 a.m. with her hands clasped in front of her, waiting. "Come here," she said. "I want you to see this." I followed her around the corner to the main entrance display case, the one usually reserved for local history exhibits and seasonal reading recommendations. The case had been cleared. In the center, propped on a wooden bookstand, was a hardcover copy of my novel. The dust jacket was dark green with gold lettering. Above the title, in the space where an author's name goes, was my name, Natalie Forrester. Around the book, mounted on the backing board, were handwritten notes from the library staff, index cards in different colors of ink, some short, some long. I read them one at a time. "Congratulations, Natalie. You earned this. We watched you write this during lunch breaks and never said a word. We're saying it now. From the reference desk to the bestseller shelf, we always knew." And in the center, in Helen Brooks's careful handwriting on a cream-colored card, "Our Natalie, we always knew." I stood in front of the display for a long time. I didn't cry. I didn't need to. Only clarity, only relief. Only the particular quiet of a door that has finally closed. The Boise Statesman ran a feature that week. They photographed the lobby display. They interviewed Helen. They mentioned the novel's premise: a woman in 1890s Idaho who builds a library in a town that doesn't want one. And they noted in the third paragraph that the author had worked as a reference librarian at the very building where the display stood. They didn't mention my family. There was nothing to mention. My family had removed themselves from the story the moment they tried to take it from me. I never regretted a single second of it. Some doors close so better ones can open. I closed the one that needed closing, and the one that opened, the one lined with index cards and staff handwriting and a novel with my name on the cover, was the only door I needed. Setting boundaries isn't cruel. It's protection. And the people who call you selfish for protecting your work are usually the ones who plan to take it. If you enjoyed this story about protecting what you've built and knowing the difference between family and people who happen to share your name, hit that like button and let me know what you think in the comments. And if you haven't subscribed yet, make sure to subscribe and ring that notification bell for more stories just like this one. Thanks for watching.